Welcome to Historic Denver's program on masonry for the older home. Denver has a rich history of masonry construction, but most homeowners don't realize that the way their old home was built isn't the way that masonry is done today. We've invited some masons from building restoration specialties to come out, talk to us a little bit about historic mortar, and then demonstrate some repairs in this great 1920s bungalow.
My name is Bart Baker. I work for Building Restoration Specialties out of Denver, Colorado. I've been doing this for I don't even know how long it's been. I've done historic masonry and new masonry for probably 30 years. So love working on these old houses and old buildings. It's very, very neat what you see and how they built them. There's a difference between a historic mason and a regular mason. And a lot of masons now that are in new construction can't do this type of work. And you want to make sure you're not just hiring somebody that does come out. And I don't like to pick apart other people's work, but you know, the things that they do is the way they would do them on another job, but it's not the proper way and it doesn't look good. So I would check their references for one thing, and then I would actually ask them if you decided to give them the job to do a mock-up and show them, you know, if it's acceptable to you. This house is really not in bad shape. It's had a couple additions done in the 50s where they've done different mortar and different techniques. The biggest problem on this house is this front porch, which isn't surprising because on a lot of the older houses, they're usually the first things that go. And a lot of it is like I say, when they did the foundations back then, they didn't go very deep and they used a soft brick, normally a sand brick, and you know what that does with water. And it's just a matter of time. But if you really think about how long it's been here and how long it's lasted, it's not too bad. I think the biggest thing for homeowners to do is water is one of your biggest demons, and it's going to cause the most problems. So I think it's very important for them to assess their property. Where's the water line? Where's it coming off the roof? Where's it settling? What's it causing? And if they can correct those problems, then the life is going to be a lot longer. I think just know one thing, it is a time-consuming thing. If you're going to do it right, and make sure whoever does it knows what they're doing. Well, the first thing you do is you're going to look at here and you can see that we have a gutter here with a downspout that runs right down by this column. And I'm not sure how many homeowners have lived here, but at one time this probably was never taken care of or maintained, so the water constantly just probably went right down here. The brick foundation probably under here has been deteriorating and it's sinking, and as you can see here, it's pulling this column base down, which in turn is pulling this wall out here. Boom. When this repair is done, you're going to want to put this mortar back in historical, repoint, and we're going to want to match. Now as I look at this, I like to look at see what is exposed, what kind of profile they have on the joints, and I can tell you that this is a concave joint. And I can also tell you that this is more of it's got a bigger aggregate in it. But if you'll notice, you have bigger aggregate that's showing here. But here, in this particular spot where it's not deteriorated, you don't see the big aggregate that much because it hasn't deteriorated away. So when they do strike this, you see more of a fine sand on the surface. But if you were going to point this area here and you didn't want to repoint it all, you are actually going to want to take out a section of joint, section of joint, section of joint, section of joint, and you're actually going to want to take your pointing in and match it into what's original around it, whether it's struck or whether it's more of a rough. Or your other option is to remove all of it and repoint the whole thing. I could go back right in here, and I don't know if you can see that. This is an original mortar here. Problem is this has also had a lot of water in here, so I wouldn't trust this necessarily for the color. This right here, as you look back in here, is the bed joint mortar. And for this corner around here, you can see this is where it's actually been repointed before, and you can come around here to see exactly how thick that pointing mortar is. I can see some original mortar here, and I can see where they've came in and pointed as you can see, these they're proper and all the way down. You can go all the way down there. So there's very little original here. This repointing, if I was to guess, is probably only going to be about this far back. So you still have all original mortar behind this repoint. I'll kind of go into our next step that I would do. And what I have here is I have 3 different sands to do. So what we would do is we would go through here, and then normally I would say that you would want to do a mortar analysis that would actually tell you the size of aggregates that you would have in your mortar. Here we have a super fine sand. This is a regular masonry sand. The aggregate's a little bit bigger. And then we have a concrete sand, which has a much bigger aggregate. So in just looking at this house and looking at the mortar type here, I know that this is a concrete sand by the size of the aggregate that I seen in there. Okay. So if I was not to get a mortar analysis, this would be what I would use to point this house with. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and make up a little pointing mortar, and we'll point something up. Dan's getting into some mortar color. He's getting prepped to make the pointing material. He has a measure bucket here. We're going to go with the type O mortar on this. So he's got a bucket that tells him for proportions to make that mortar. And as with all, it's a trial and error to find the right color, but we know we're dealing with the red. So we're going to kind of start out with what we would normally make. And then you really can't tell until it dries. And a lot of times I'll make 3 or 4 and cut the ratio of the mortar color down and let them dry and see what's the best one. But for today's purposes, we're just going to go ahead and make some red mortar. Sometimes you can take the bed joint mortar and a lot of times you can get a reference point. You can take the dry mortar and match it with the crushed up dry this mortar. And as you can see, I don't necessarily trust this too much because I know it's been waterlogged, so I don't think it's quite this dark. But it gives you a starting point. Now, Dan's mixed this pointing mortar up here, and generally we've got the color just kind of where we think it might be for a trial. What we would do is we would take this and we would make probably 4 or 5 different shades of it and make mortar balls and put them out and let them dry and see which one comes the closest color to what we do. One thing with the pointing mortar that you do, you want your pointing mortar to be able to ball up in your hand and stay together. And red is actually a nasty color to make, but that's not bad right there. That's pretty good pointing mortar. And I would make these in several different things. We'd let them dry, break them open, you can see what the colors are going to be. Okay. Now we're going to go over to the wall. Now I think what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and prep them. And I think what we'll do is we'll just prep this joint here. Even though we've got a bunch here that's not correct, we're just going to go ahead and do this and seal these joints up for now. When you're doing a miscellaneous point like this versus an entire production tuck pointing job where you would want to use a grinder. Now the thing with using a grinder to cut joints out, it's not for everybody, and whoever does that has to show that they can operate a device without tearing a wall up. If you run into a real tight mortar and you try to hammer chisel this out, and if it's in with a soft brick, you're going to do more damage trying to take it out with the hammer and chisel than you would with the grinder. So grinders have their places, and hammers and chisels have their places. For this one, we're just going to go ahead and prep these. I'm going to use what's called a tooth and chisel and a brick hammer. And I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to just, that brick's kind of loose, but I'm just going to come in here and I'm just going to kind of clean this mortar out here in this joint. I want to make sure I get it back enough deep. I'm going to go ahead and take this head joint out. going to go ahead and pop this brick out. Now you can see when I'm doing that, see the old dirty dead mortar back here? This is all dead. And then right here's a perfect prime example of buttering over dead mortar. And then what they did is they just went over it with pointing mortar and covered it up and says, that's good, there you go. That'll be $900. There's a lot of work that goes in this, and people don't really realize it. And when you tell them, you know, they go, oh. But it's not like you can take a regular bricklayer and do this. So this is the old bed joint mortar right here. Dan, I think the color might be pretty good. Yeah, no, I'm in here. I'm gonna look at your column that doesn't have anything in it. That's a, yep, there's nothing tall to column. So all the weight on this porch is actually sitting on the outside courses. This isn't a solid masonry pier. It's one of the reasons it's collapsing. I'm just gonna come up here and I'm just gonna, and you wanna be careful when you're doing this, because the last thing you really wanna do is cause more. See over here where they've smeared the mortar up on the brick where they repointed it? This is a much harder mortar. Okay, now I've got this brick out. This joint is ready. It is back far enough. I'm going to go ahead and take this back because that mortar's kind of dead anyway. Okay. Okay, now that I got all the dead mortar out, I'm going to go ahead and give this a rinse. I want a clean surface for that, and I want that to kind of be wet. This particular brick holds water. You want it damp, but you don't want it ringing with water because your mortar is just going to get smeary. So I like to just kind of let this kind of set for a minute. So now I'm clean. All right, here I got this joint right here. So before I lay this brick back in there, I'm going to go ahead and point that brick up. And I'm going to pack it in there. Now when you're tuck pointing a joint where you're raking it back, you normally want to put them in where it's thumbprint hard. You know, you do it in layers, not necessarily doing that, but this is actually a full joint, so I'm just going to go ahead and fill it all in. I'm just going to pack that because I'm going to make this solid right here. I'm just going to leave that. Now I'm not going to mess with that because I want it to set up a bit. Now this is a margin trowel, so you want to make sure you got the right trowel for doing that. You don't want a big mason trowel to put one brick in. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get some mud on this brick, and I'm going to just get me a little bed joint going here. I want to look at my joint size. I'm going to go ahead now and I'm going to go ahead and put some mortar on my brick. That way when I put it in there, I'll actually have a full joint on the top. Get that brick in there. I want to line it up as close as I can. Corners line up, not out, in, there. I want to match the profile of the existing joint. Now you try not to be messy, and the biggest mistake you can make is trying to rush this. Okay, that brick is in. I'm just going to take some of that off of there. And I'm going to let that set for a minute. We're going to strike the profile on it. You want to let it get almost like the thumbprint hard.
Okay.
That's when you want to do that. I think the biggest thing with red mortar is you know that it does fade. And then after you expose the aggregate in it is when you really find your color. So a lot of times you have to point the red, do your washing before you really know what it's going to look like. Yeah. That's getting pretty close because I can see my print in it, but it's still a little wet. Now we just let this kind of dry up. See how it's overlapped on the brick? If you try to brush it off now while it's too wet, all you're going to do is get the smears, especially into these type of wire cut brick. It's very hard to clean out of there. Take a natural brush, knock those off, restrike it again, and you're good to go.
Masonry repairs for the older home require some specialized skills and know-how, but it's important for all owners to educate themselves to ensure that their property is being repaired with the appropriate materials and techniques. Doing so will complement the existing construction and maintain the current appearance and performance of their building. If you'd like more information about masonry repairs, please contact Historic Denver at historicdenver.org or the National Trust for Historic Preservation at preservationnation.org. Thank you for watching.